Welcome to Non-Beta Alpha. I'm Ryan Morfin. On today's episode, we have Trevor Smith, the CEO of Atomic-6, talking to us about how the revolution in material science is going to impact sea, land, air, and space. This is Non-Beta Alpha. Welcome to Non-Beta Alpha. On today's episode, we have Trevor Smith, the CEO of Atomic-6, talking to us about the revolution in materials and why it's critical for us to get to the next evolution of business. Trevor, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Yeah. So you're in from Atlanta. I appreciate you coming in to talk about, your front row seat at all these different changes that are happening in the world today. I think a lot of people watched Maverick, Top Gun, and that beginning sequence when he's taking the Dark Knight up, that's only possible with people like you.
Yeah.
Because what a lot of people don't understand is the 20th century materials that we had can't go that fast. And so it requires us to have a revolution in material science. And so enter Atomic-6.
That's us.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal journey, your entrepreneurial journey, where you are today, and then would love to dive into the science. You brought some products today for our viewers to see. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, Ryan, we're a hardware company, so I couldn't show up empty-handed, a little show and tell. I met my co-founder, who's a mechanical engineer, and had a unique sort of first principles way to think about making aerospace-grade composite parts. So a composite is typically, in our world, carbon fiber and resin. How do we get aerospace-grade composite parts, but more like automotive-level sort of production and capability without losing that performance? So it's actually a unique, I call it a glorified muffin pan, which is a mold. So everyone knows what a muffin pan is, but we have a very unique mold that allows us to pull more performance out of any given material set than any composite company we've come across. So we are agnostic to the raw materials from an input perspective. So you see us play in hypersonics, space, armor, sea applications, and maritime applications. So we actually go after extreme and demanding environments, which is where you need that utmost performance. So that's where that original IP tooling came from and got us started.
So is it the chemistry that's different or the physics of your process, or both?
It's primarily the physics. So we use what's called an autoclave. An autoclave is an oven, but we pressurize it with nitrogen, which is an inert gas. We operate up to pressures equivalent to about 2,000 feet below sea level. So we're manipulating that fiber, resin, and we call it void content, but it's air, in a unique manner inside that pressure vessel and curing that composite structure in a unique manner.
I mean, a lot of our viewers don't have experience in hypersonics or space, but they should, and they're learning, and that's part of what this series is about. Explain to the layman out there what types of environments your materials can survive in.
Sure. So the fastest publicly known aircraft would be the SR-71 Blackbird. I think it flew Mach 3.2, somewhere around there, which is 3.2 times the speed of sound. One of our customers right in Atlanta, Georgia, an awesome startup, shout out to Hermeus. They are building Mach 5 aircraft with a long-term goal of actually being commercial flights. They're standing that up through a lot of DoD applications to get to that commercial flight. But you're talking about going from London to New York in like 90 minutes versus like a 7-hour or 6-hour flight, moving at speeds at Mach 5, which those environments, like you're talking about 1,800 degrees Celsius for extended flight time. Things get really hot, so you need unique materials to operate in that environment.
So like a 737 that you and I jump on all the time, that would melt if it was going that fast.
Yes. It would start to fall apart very quickly.
Yeah, we'd all be pancakes, and it would not be a good outcome. So if you guys aren't successful at finding these new materials, these new physical properties, that next level of speed isn't going to be attainable.
Right. I mean, we've hit those speeds previously, and it all depends on sort of what altitude you're flying at, how much oxygen you're actually going through. Mm-hmm. So the higher up in the altitude, the easier it is. So I think they've publicly stated this, it's somewhere around 80,000 to 100,000 altitude versus, the typical commercial flight you're on is around 30,000 altitude.
And it's not just about the durability, but it's also about the weight. And so talk to me about, some of your products, I've played with them, they're huge, but they don't weigh much. How do you guys do that?
So composites are really unique. If you think about how much a single strand of carbon fiber or a tow could hold up, it's about 2,000 pounds. So imagine a little bitty string being able to hold up 2,000 pounds. When you put that into a structure that's designed for extreme environments, you can do a lot of unique things. But it's a big engineering challenge, to say the least.
No, it is. And I think a lot of people don't realize the quantum of scale that you're going to have to tackle if you go into the next economy, which is space. We just saw this weekend Elon Musk with the Starship just had a great win for humanity.
I think I've watched that video 100 times already since Sunday.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. I mean, you said it best. Space is open for business. What does that mean for you from a space economy standpoint, for your company, and for your view of the space economy?
Yeah, so with Starship coming online, clearly it's going to work. If you go to El Segundo or Hawthorne, in Southern California, you can probably hit 10 space startups within a quick block or two, right? So there's so many unique startups that are coming online because the launch costs have dropped dramatically. Well, that's great, but how do you actually make that a business? So you have to find ways to make money in space, right? So we mentioned a couple of companies like Varda. They're manufacturing pharmaceuticals in space. Why does that matter? So you can actually turn off the gravity variable when you're making things. So fiber optics can be made more efficiently. You can print human organs. Lots of unique case studies with things made in a zero-G environment where you can get more efficiencies out of it. We talked about mining on the way over here. We talked about lunar mining, asteroid mining, so liquid oxygen off the moon, helium-3 off the moon. These are all going to be infrastructure plays to help build that space economy. So no longer will we be doing just really expensive, fun science experiments on the ISS. It's really turning those into something that are viable businesses. People will be working and living in space, I think, before the end of the decade.
And again, none of this is possible without having new construction materials, new building materials, new vehicle materials. So maybe we talk a little bit about some of the products that you guys brought here today.
Sure.
Give us an example or two of what you guys build.
Yeah, I'll start right here. And we'll play the video with this. Let's see. Is a 1/2-inch thick shield. So this is, you can hold it if you want.
Pretty light.
It is a 2 kilograms micrometeorite and orbital debris shield. So that impact right there was a 3 millimeter aluminum ball moving at Mach 21. So we talked about hypersonics earlier with Hermes moving at Mach 5. This little ball is moving at orbital velocity in low Earth orbit, so about 17,000 miles an hour. That will rip through a satellite or a human-rated space station. But as you can see, there's no deformation on the back here. So this is the lightest, thinnest, most capable meteorite shield that Space Force has ever seen.
And that's called space armor.
Yeah, it's literally called space armor. We own spacearmor.com.
Yep.
It was great. And the mission here, we're under a tactical funding increase. So if you look at the SBIR program, you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. A TACFI, or tactical funding increase, is between a phase 2 and a 3. And the goal of this tactical funding increase is to get this through space qualification to be put on a very valuable asset to Space Force going to geosynchronous orbit. So they're worried about a $1 billion bird getting taken out by a grain of sand, right? That's not a good day.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how much garbage we've put up in the last 50 years into orbit. And a lot of space debris is floating around there, and it's moving at shocking speeds. And so you need to have something to protect not only the payload and the satellite, but also the astronauts' lives.
Speaking of astronauts, Commander Chris Hadfield, the first Canadian commander of the ISS, is a friend of ours and mentor of mine. He actually signed the first space armor shield we made. And I said, Chris, how often is the ISS getting hit with this stuff? He said, it sounds like rain on a tin roof. And he's actually been on spacewalks to replace what's called a Whipple shield, which is what the technology today protecting the ISS. So it's just a bunch of metal plates. He has to go out, change these plates out, and swap the new ones in so the ISS can take all these hits that it's getting in low Earth orbit.
It's a random question then. So when he's doing a spacewalk, is he getting hit with space debris?
It's a very dangerous spacewalk. And so we actually talked to Axiom, who's under contract to build a lunar astronaut suit. They said, could you take space armor and actually put it on like a chest plate, like you would think about like a military guy on the terrestrially putting on a chest plate? So this is formable, right? You can shape it. Unlike today's Whipple shields, you can put this thing into a chest plate and actually put it into an astronaut suit.
So we're going to have ballistic astronaut suits. I love it, which makes sense.
So Prada is designing the Axiom astronaut suit, and I'm looking for a headline that says, designed by Prada, protected by Atomic-6.
That's good.
Yeah.
I like that. So the next thing you have here are some lightweight, well, I'm not going to steal the thunder, solar arrays. Is that what they are?
Yeah, they are satellite solar arrays. Yeah, and the product name that we have come up with it is Lightwing.
So this is super thin. I mean,
it's about 9/1000ths of an inch thick.
Very sharp, but this is a solar array, so it's like a solar panel to create electricity in space. And you guys make this in your autoclave.
Correct. We actually make the whole structure. So we'll show a rendering of the Lightwing being deployed and then also retracted. So the different parts here, we have this right here. This is a mast. So this mast can flatten like this, and it pops out. So it rolls up. Think about like a measuring tape. So I use this as my demo. You can pull that out there. So these solar panels will actually go along this way, and as they roll out, they'll flatten, and then you'll have these big solar panels powering satellites, infrastructure on the moon, all sorts of power requirements.
And so this is super light. I mean, if you were to have like a solar farm, the solar panels on Earth would be hundreds of pounds. This is, I mean, a baby could carry this.
Yeah, so our 15-foot version, which I couldn't bring into the studio today, it weighs, 0.4 pounds. Yeah, but the really genius piece of all of this, so Lightwing, the piece is actually the hinge. So the single biggest reason that satellites fail is the deployment of their solar arrays. So last year, Viasat had a $470-ish million insurance claim because their solar arrays didn't deploy properly. So typically, when you deploy a solar array, think about like a scissor lift, right? You've got metal springs and hinges sort of doing like this. This is our hinge. There's no metal, there's no spring, and we cure it in we call it the stowed form, right? So like it's sewed up, and then when you deploy the boom, it actually opens up and stretches this out, so it keeps tension on these solar arrays. So it's really, really tight, but you only have a very thin backsheet. So it's a very light structure. And then when you want to retract it, this just wants to go back to its original form. So there's no way to get stuck, right? And you're operating in some very unique temperatures, right? So minus 80 degrees Celsius up to 130 degrees Celsius. So you have to make these structures for that environment. So the gold you see here is actually Kapton. We cured that in situ, meaning like we cured the Kapton with the composite part in the autoclave. This protects from atomic oxygen and radiation and all sorts of nasty things that you have to get through in space.
That's interesting. So Elon's getting the launch costs down, and there's a payload associated with that, and you're reducing the weight of the payload.
Yes.
So we're getting a two-factor, expansion of capabilities for space. And that's where I think a lot of people don't realize. It sounds like science fiction, but a lot of the space economy is accelerating and it's leapfrogging as we keep making these milestones to make it more affordable to do things in space.
Yeah, so I'll bring up our COO, Christian Carpenter. Amazing, amazing partner of mine. Personally hired by Elon Musk, interviewed, and also Tom Mueller. So Christian designed the propulsion system for all of Starlink. I'm sure you've heard of Starlink before. He built 1010-1 and 2, which were the original Starlink satellites. And then he designed the entire manufacturing facility for all of Starlink, and then built the first 1,400 during COVID. So at one point in history, my COO was responsible for about half of all orbiting satellites. And I've got some big shoes to fill because his old boss was Elon Musk, and now I got to step it up a little bit, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, you guys are a very unique company in the United States. Just talk about the composites sector in general. Is this the sector that the U.S. dominates in? How is it vis-a-vis Europe and China? Like, where is the sector today? Yeah,
I think from a composites perspective, you've got the U.S. leading. A lot of fiber is made in Asia, and so we have to be, because we're defense focused, or at least 50-50 defense focused, we have to make sure our suppliers are domestically sourced and that sort of thing. So there is limited supply chains there, especially on some very exotic fibers. But I think in general, the composites industry, really the U.S. is leading the way. And we're helping to lead that.
Well, in your business, we hear a lot from CEOs that come on the show about supply chain risk and issues. Do you have supply chain bottlenecks in your supply chain?
Yeah, so the fiber in this actually comes overseas from Japan, and we're asking for U.S. suppliers because this is a very exotic fiber that's required to do that. But our allies help us along the way, so that the Five Eyes, and we can get supplies from there. But also, we're developing in-house resin systems specifically for space applications, so we can have that domestically sourced, and it gives us a competitive edge because we are providing a very unique resin system that normally you would pay $1,000 a pound for because it's space qualified, where we're making it in-house with better performance, and we're going through that qualification now to lower that cost.
So you're doing space, you're doing hypersonics. What other sectors are you guys touching at Atomic-6?
Yeah, we're looking at terrestrial armor, and we have to say terrestrial because we also have space armor, looking at terrestrial armor and also maritime, right? So in maritime, you see corrosion as a big problem, and composites are great for corrosion because they don't corrode in that saltwater environment.
So going back to hypersonics, so you have a front row seat a lot of what's going on in the U.S. hypersonics community. People say we're behind the 8 ball with China. Where do you think we are hypersonics-wise? And what does the future of that look like?
Yeah, hypersonics is obviously a hot topic, but I think we will always need to have that capability. But you also want to develop, drones in mass where you're not sending a $130 million missile down that could be taken out by like 1,000, drones that are very, very inexpensive. So we have to be careful with that in the theater of war. It's like, do we really want to spend that much money and have a drone stop it, or what's the best way to financially overcome that adversary?
Yep. Yeah. Unit economics of war is going to be critical going forward. So as you look at your product offering, what does the future look like? What are you guys going to be growing into? What other types of products in the future?
Yeah. You had one of our newest customers on here, I think 2 episodes ago, a friend of ours, Clay, over at Delta Black.
Yep.
Just met with him yesterday. They opened up their offices a few days ago, and so it's exciting to see them getting off the ground. And we'll be building the fuselage, wings, all the composite structures for that Group 3 drone. We're really excited about that. So high performance aeronautics, I think Clay and his team are doing a really cool job, and they have a unique bird. So they're excited, and we are excited to partner with them on building that aircraft.
And you also do some other work for other aircrafts. You can't talk about maybe the bird name or the manufacturer,
sure,
but what do you do for high performance aircraft right now?
Yeah, so we got a SBIR Phase 2 from the Air Force Research Lab to develop what's called a center wing bulkhead. So we actually did 2 different bulkheads on a Group 5 unmanned fighter. So a Group 5, think about like an F-35 without a pilot. So we've built for 2 different primes, we won't drop their name, but really unique structures that are critical to that aircraft. So when you think about where we play in the high performance arenas of sea, land, air, and space.
And so as you're building this company, what has the tech ecosystem been like for you, the venture ecosystem? I mean, you've been through some successful incubator programs. Maybe talk a little bit about that. Any advice you have for other founders out there listening to the show?
We've done 2 accelerated, actually 3. Starburst Aerospace, they are the first and only global aerospace accelerator. They look at about 3,000 companies a year. They picked 20 and 10 from the US. We were one of 10 chosen. The next one we went through is Mass Challenge Air Force Labs out of Boston. They basically help companies who get a SBIR Phase 1 and get them the partners and stakeholders they need and identify those to get to a successful Phase 2 contract. And then the third is Creative Destruction Labs, and we did the space stream. So they have like 20 different streams with different industries. That's where I met Commander Hatfield and lots of other good partnerships there on the space side. So CDL is great, which is Creative Destruction Lab. Starburst is great. Mass Challenge is great. But what I would tell the founders, I've gone through 3 rounds of funding, and I'm proud that we have not taken on a ton of dilution. So I won't say how much, but it's pretty little compared to where we are. So we actually have done more in sales than we've raised. We've been break even and actually profitable as an aerospace hard tech manufacturing company. We've now got 13 full-time employees. That's really hard to say in the aerospace industry that you're break even and profitable in this arena. And so I'd tell the founders, don't raise on hype, raise on what you've built. So my wife and I, my co-founder, we didn't want to take on dilution in the early days because, one, I didn't know if it was going to work. So I don't want to take friends and family money and then have a bad Thanksgiving or Christmas. So we bootstrapped it for 3 years, right? I wanted to get some lab results that were really compelling. The first panels we made were for Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. And when we got that data back, it was like, wow, there's something here. That's when we decided to go raise funds. Instead of, hey, I have an idea, let's take on a bunch of dilution. Like, don't raise on hype, raise on what you've done.
I mean, the fact that you've had more in sales than you've taken capital, I mean, that's a venture capital's, sweet dream. So I think a lot of CEOs don't get that today. I think a lot of CEOs in the venture community are raising a lot of money and spending a lot of money, and it's going to catch up with them because people don't realize your revenue, if you have a high valuation, your revenue has to grow into that.
Right.
And if you're just a professional fundraiser and not building a product or a business, it'll catch up. And so I think right now people are saying the new flat round is the new up round.
We haven't had a flat round.
Yeah, that's good.
Every round's been up. Our first round was in 21, which is saying something, right?
Yeah. And so these are tougher times for some of the venture firms who have backed founders who don't have the discipline that Trevor has. And I commend you for that because it's easy. A lot of money is thrown around the space today. It's easy to take that money and just waste it and burn capital.
Sure.
So as we're looking at the Atlanta ecosystem, so you're in from Atlanta. Maybe give some props out to how developed is Atlanta. People always talk about Silicon Valley, the West Coast, Boston. Atlanta's become a hub of innovation. What's going on in Atlanta?
I actually was just at Venture Atlanta last week. One of I think the biggest sort of venture conference in at least the Southeast. There were a few hundred ventures and startups and all these other things. But on the hardware side, that's where Atlanta is lacking. But you've got Hermeus, which is one of the coolest, I think, hardware companies out in the country today. I think they're a little over 200 employees and have raised something like $250 million. And I met AJ and Glenn when it was 6 guys in a tiny office at PDK Airport in like 2019. And AJ was like, hey, give me a couple years. We're going to need your stuff. And now we're actually working with them. But the Atlanta ecosystem is getting a bit more on the spotlight. It's closer to the Space Coast than, say, Southern California, because a lot of launches happen out of the Cape. I like it. One, because I can get on a Delta flight and pretty much go anywhere. But two, it's just cost of living. Labor's a lot cheaper. Real estate's a lot cheaper than you would see in Southern California, where there's a lot of space companies. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, it does. I mean, look, the funding is venture funding has spread out over the country over the last few years. It's interesting. We're starting to see more ventures in California now pick up in the first half of this year, but that's really, I think, primarily due to like AI and things like that. But
our largest single investor is actually in Atlanta. Like, there's not many defense investors in Atlanta, but Eve Atlas is our most recent VC firm, and Tiago Olson runs that. He's there in Atlanta. He comes into the office, he gets his hands dirty, right? Part of the requirement was, hey, if I give you this investment, I want to come get my hands dirty and work on these things, which was a very good value add when we were looking at bringing in money, not just dumb money, but like actual smart money, and how can we utilize that VC skill set to improve the company.
Well, I think that's an invitation to all VCs. If you want to get your hands dirty, go to
get your hands dirty.
Atomic-6.
Yeah.
Well, as we kind of wind down the interview here, I want to always ask you like 3 questions. Like, one question is, what keeps you up at night right now?
What keeps me up at night? Have you seen Leave the World Behind?
Yes.
Okay, that keeps me up at night. So there's a sort of a meme thing on LinkedIn. It's called ConkSat. They sort of make fun of the space industry, but you could take 2 50-pound bags of sand and take out a constellation, which means you could take out the banking system. Like, our satellite infrastructure
is... Say that. So what you're saying is, if someone threw a bag of sand in space, we would...
It's that simple.
We would wipe out the satellites.
It is very scary because they're so fragile, right? Because weight is so important to the satellite system, and mass, which is why we're trying to develop space armor, right? To take on and protect those very expensive assets that, if you have an asset like that come down, you lose your cell phone service, you lose GPS, you lose banking. Like, that is what keeps me up at night, is someone just dropping a bag of sand in low Earth orbit and taking out like the entire Starlink constellation.
Well, and that's what people don't realize. I think, all these electronic vehicles and all these great, luxuries of modern day society. I mean, if we lose GPS or we lose the grid, people don't realize what their neighbor is going to act like when their family misses their fourth meal, right?
Yeah.
Things get very, very slippery very fast. And I think our grid is at risk. I think, so let me ask you a random question. So
Sure.
can you create a product to up armor like an F-350 for like EMP? Would that be something you guys could do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right, we're going to talk after the show.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's a real risk that I think people aren't realizing. It's not a very high cost, strategy to wipe out the satellite system of the West.
That's what keeps me up at night. It's not what are we doing with our taxes or what are we doing with like these other issues in our country. It's like, how could we be totally wiped out very quickly? That I think is the biggest threat.
What books are you reading right now?
Can I name a couple?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so one of my favorites, Now the Physics of Time. One of the things I learned from that book, you could take if you're moving fast enough, you can take a 20-foot long pole and stick it in a 10-foot barn. There's math in the book. I won't try to explain it, but it is a really, really cool physics book that talks about, can we travel back in time? Do things move faster than the speed of light? What does that mean? Is fate really a thing, or is it all predetermined? It's a pretty unique book. The second one, if you like fun sci-fi, is called The Bobaverse. It's basically the main character. He puts his brain in an AI and becomes this really cool spacefaring robot. And AI, not a robot, but it's 5 books, and it's really, really interesting to see like where could AI go and how could we like explore the universe using von Neumann probes as sort of the basis of the book. It's like a probe that can replicate itself, drop a new probe off, and keep going using materials in situ wherever they are in the universe. So it's a pretty cool book. And then the last one is Venture Deals by Brad Feld. So Clay over at Delta Black, I said, Clay, you're fundraising. You got to go read Venture Deals. I tell every founder, go read Venture Deals. And I reread it to kind of keep my mind fresh.
No, that's a great book. And if you're looking to raise capital, that's a critical book to read. It'll give you at least the vernacular of what people are talking about. So why are you optimistic about the future?
I'm optimistic because I think the thing that the U.S. does best is we are always, I think, the best innovators in the world. We don't want to sit on our hands and say, hey, we've already done all these things. We want to keep moving and keep improving. I think the DoD is starting to do a better job by pulling technology from small startups. Previously, it's like, hey, we'll give these to the primes and see what happens. But I think there's so much innovation going on in the defense and space sector that is going to improve humanity. I'm excited about that.
Well, Trevor, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been phenomenal to watch your journey. You can tell you're having fun, and you're working on some very cool programs. Some of them we couldn't even talk about today. But I will tell you, Atomic-6 is making the best materials in the universe. So thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Non-Beta Alpha.
All price references and market forecasts correspond to the date of this recording. This podcast should not be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced in whole, or in part. The information contained in this podcast does not constitute research or recommendation from Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Lowndes Square, LLC, or any of their affiliates to the listener. Neither Non-Beta Alpha Inc., Lowndes Square, LLC, nor any of their affiliates make any representation or warranty as to the accuracy or completeness of the statements or any information contained in this podcast. And any liability, therefore, including in respect of direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage, is expressly disclaimed. The views expressed in this podcast are not necessarily those of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Lowndes Square, LLC, and Non-Beta Alpha Inc. and Lowndes Square, LLC are not providing any financial, economic, legal, accounting, or tax advice or recommendations in this podcast. In addition, the receipt of this podcast by any listener is not to be taken as constituting the giving of investment advice by Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Lowndes Square, LLC, to that listener, nor to constitute such person a client of any affiliates of Non-Beta Alpha Inc. or Lowndes Square, LLC. This does not constitute an offer to buy or sell any security. Investments in security may not be suitable for all investors, and investment of any security may involve risk and the potential loss of your initial investment. Investors should review all risk factors before investing. Investors should perform their own due diligence before considering any investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Investment products, insurance and annuity products are not FDIC insured, not bank guaranteed, not insured by a federal government agency, may lose value,